Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 14th of September of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And before we start with Ukraine, let's discuss the very important details and updates that we got from the North Korea. Today the Russian sources reported that North Koreans are planning to support and to send Russians a lot of very interesting toys. First of all, they're going to send them the MLRS system like KN-09 that are able to attack within a distance of 220 kilometers, and very high chances that North Korea is going to provide Russians another MLRS system KN-25, and these systems are able to attack even longer distances. So we discussed this situation many times, that Ukrainians do have artillery superiority when talking about long-range artillery systems, and probably the Russians are trying to solve these issues by getting something from North Korea. So we'll see. Anyway, other sources reported that the first weapons will be sent somewhere in September, October, and we're going to see this new North Korean weapon just in November, exactly at possible days of possible Russian greatest counteroffensive operation. Now let's move to the south and let's discuss the situation in the Crimea and the South Ukraine area. As we discussed in the previous video, the Ukrainians during the day made a lot of attempts to attack Crimea with the Navy drones, and according to the Russians, they managed to shut down and destroy every single drone. Furthermore, during the day, the Ukrainians made a lot of attempts to attack the Russian fleet and the Russian ships in the Black Sea. Also, every single drone was destroyed. And probably the most important updates are coming from the western part of the Crimea, of the land Crimea. Today there was another attack using the drones. The Ukrainians were using long-range drones for these purposes, and the main purpose of those attacks that Ukrainians tried to implement this morning is to stress and to test the Russian artillery air defense system. And after that, according to the Ukrainian sources, the Ukrainians managed to discover the Russian S-400 air defense system, and as a result of artillery strike, the Ukrainians, not as a result of artillery, but as a result of missile strike, the Ukrainians managed to destroy the Russian S-400 system. But this information regarding S-400 was provided us just by the Ukrainian and pro-Ukrainian sources. We haven't received video details, geolocated video of that attack, so there are very high chances that that attack and all those rumors, it was just a speculation. Because if you remember, for example, even in the beginning of September, we got some videos from this area, from Crimea, not just from Crimea, let's take not from September, but from August. Let's say in August, we got videos how the Ukrainians destroyed Russian S-300 systems, S-400, and at least the Ukrainians provided us some geolocated videos. But when talking about the recent case that took place today, we haven't received even a single confirmation, so let's wait a little bit. Now we are moving to South Ukraine area, to Kherson direction. The Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions, the Ukrainian forces that were located or are located in the settlements like Tyaginka, Lvova, Burhunka, Kazatska, the settlement Adradakamyanka, Berislav. You know that this is a very interesting situation, because the Russians started bombing and attacking these settlements, this bank of the river, just after the Ukrainian attempt to establish control over Kazachye Lagery. As I understand, the Ukrainians managed to concentrate significant number of forces along this bank, and they are trying to keep these forces before the next wave of attack. Currently, the Ukrainians haven't received any order to continue landing operation, maybe because of these bombings and attacks from the Russian side. But no matter the situation, if we increase the number of updates since the beginning of September, we see how much the Russians are concentrated in this area. We see that the Russians attacked a lot of time Lvova, Burgunka, the Russians attacked Adradakamyanka, the Russians attacked Kazatsky, Veselye, Mykolaiv, a lot of attempts. And furthermore, we can, if we talk about the Ministry of Defense report, for example, the Russians reported that as a result of bombings that took place today, the Ukrainians lost 70 soldiers. For example, when talking about yesterday, The Ukrainians, according to the Ministry of Defense report, lost around 80 soldiers. So we see that Ukrainians had significant number of losses, and mainly the Ukrainians had their losses in this area, in the settlements that the Russians were bombed heavily. Now we are moving further to the Orechov, to the Bradley Square. We haven't received almost nothing from this direction, the same thing as we discussed in the previous videos, that Ukrainians continue attempts to concentrate their forces in Robotyne. For these purposes, they're using like 47th and 65th mechanized brigades. The Ukrainians try to concentrate their forces in the southern salient between Novoparkopovka and Verbova. For these purposes, they're trying to concentrate 46th Air Mobile Brigade, and of course the Ukrainians continue their concentration in the Verbova salient in this small bag and pocket, and for these purposes the Ukrainians try to concentrate 82nd and 71st Jaeger Brigade. The Russians from their side attack the Ukrainians almost every single day, 24 hours, 7 days a week, but this is just regular artillery and drone clashes without any attempts from both sides to attack. When talking about progress, probably very likely that the Ukrainians establish full control over the hills that are located on the south of Robotyne, and currently the Ukrainians are probably ready to continue their offensive operation, to continue their attacks in direction of Novoprokopovka, in direction of Очеретовate, and in direction, of course, of Verbova. But for some reason, the Ukrainians are not launching this attack. The Ministry of Defense reported that as a result of clashes in the Zaporizhzhia area, the Ukrainians lost 95 soldiers, and this is one of the lowest level of losses of Ukrainian forces in this direction. Now we're moving further to the Vremivka tactical bridgehead. We haven't received almost nothing from this area as well. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation published another video of clashes and fightings in the vicinity of Novomayorska. Basically, this is another video of failed Ukrainian attempt to capture the settlement, to dig in deeper in the northwestern part of this village. Currently, I'm not going to change the color of this area because we need a little bit more evidence and more details about current situation. But anyway, most of Ukrainian attacks were repelled. The Ukrainians had significant losses, and the Ukrainians were forced to step back. Lots of infantry, lots of troopers died during the battle for this bridgehead. The Russians reported that as a result of clashes in this area, as a result of another failed attempt of Ukrainian forces to attack in direction of Novodonetsk and Novomayorska, the Ukrainians lost significant number of forces, around 140 soldiers, 3 armored vehicles, including 1 tank. When talking about the Ukrainian actions, the Ukrainians continue attacking the Russian positions among the forest lines, tree lines, among the fields. On this video we can see how the Ukrainians discovered the Russian tank that the Russians were trying to hide among the tree lines, and as a result of FPV drone that tank was damaged, and probably as a result later that tank was destroyed. Also, the Ukrainians established some fire control, drone control over Stara Mlynovka. The Ukrainians during the previous days destroyed at least 1 anti-tank position and at least 1 light vehicle that the Russians were using to supply and support their forces. Now we are moving to Donetsk direction, and we got a lot of very interesting details. We got a very interesting video from the western edge position of Ukrainian forces in Marinka. On this video we see how the Russians were bombing the last few streets with tools flamethrower systems. You know that according to this video we can say that Marinka has almost fallen. The Russians has almost cleared this territory. There are just few streets left. Very difficult situation for the Ukrainians, and this is the situation about Marinka. And also we got another geolocated clarification of the situation of the Russian forces on the north of Krasnogorovka. The Russians published the video how they were attacking and bombing with FPV drones the Ukrainian positions along the railways, which confirms that Ukrainians have 100% control over these positions. So I have adjusted the map, and currently the entire railway foothold is under complete Ukrainian control. Now we're moving probably to the most interesting and most covered with the fog of war area, the battle for Klishchiivka and Andriivka. Today the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, at least during the day, published 2 or 3 times information and updates that Ukrainians, as a result of fierce clashes, as a result of assault attempts, as a result of heavy bombings, managed to capture the settlement, but later the Ukrainian forces of 3rd 3rd Assault Brigade Azov reported that every speculation, every rumors regarding Andriivka is fake. The Ukrainians haven't managed to establish control over the settlement yet. Yes, currently they're trying to make some clearing operation, and they are about to capture entire settlement, according to the Ukrainian sources, according to the sources of 3rd Assault Brigade Azov. But if you ask my opinion, I'll tell you that I don't believe that it's even possible to capture the settlement, to capture the stronghold, and I'll explain to you why. First of all, when talking about settlement of Andriivka, we need to split this territory in two parts. The first part is Andriivka itself. The settlement, the two streets or three streets that, probably two streets that were already reduced to ruins. This is the first area. And the Ukrainians, if they are able to enter Andriivka, the Ukrainians enter just this part of the settlement, and they try to clear and to dig in deeper exactly in this area. The second positions, the second area is this one. The underground facilities that located a little bit to the southeast of Andriivka. We're talking about this area. So two areas, and if you want to talk about establishing control of Andriivka, you need to talk about taking under control of these two sectors. And the thing is that the Russians have created a very interesting and very powerful, very useful tactics. Every time the Ukrainians launch their offensive operation, they try to move along these three lines in direction from the west to the east. So let's add arrows trying to show their movement. So this is their way how they try to storm and enter the settlement. And every time before the Ukrainians enter the settlement, of course, we can see a very powerful artillery duels and artillery preparation. The Ukrainians first attack the settlement with cluster rounds, with regular rounds. They're doing everything they can to destroy and to reduce the Russian manpower inside of the settlement. If we increase the number of days, let's say from the beginning of this week, we see how many times the Ukrainians were bombing and shelling the settlement. A lot of videos, the entire settlement is covered with fire, the entire settlement is covered with smoke and so on, a lot of attacks with cluster rounds, so the situation is very difficult. But every time the Ukrainians start attacking and bombing this area, the Russians take their forces, everybody who survived or everybody they have, and they move their forces inside of these underground facilities. The Ukrainians try to attack this area also, and yesterday we discussed this video, but the problem is that these underground facilities are very big, and while the Russians were located in this area, they managed to develop and increase their positions underground, under the railways, significantly, which means that, as you can see, the Russians are entering these underground facilities. That means, and we see, one more time, this video, the Ukrainians attacked this area with cluster rounds, with regular rounds, with every type of weapon they have, but they couldn't deal even a small damage to this area. And the Russians can feel them safe, pretty safe under the railways. And as soon as the Ukrainians ends with these bombings, the Ukrainians, let's assume, are already in the settlement. The Russians, from their side, start their own artillery attack with every type of weapon they have, like TOS flamethrower systems, and mainly the Russians attack the settlement with TOS flamethrower systems. And after every usage of these systems, the Ukrainians destroyed completely. The Ukrainians' manpower in the settlement reduced almost till zero, and there are no longer Ukrainians, or they take a decision to step back. And after that, the Ukrainians from shelter come out and take their previous positions. So this is the story about Andriivka. And the thing is, if you want to take Andriivka, you need to do two things, just two things. We're talking about the Ukrainians. The first thing they need to do is to cross the railways on the north and to capture the Russian positions along the railways. The second thing the Ukrainians need is to cross the railways on the south and to capture the strongholds and the trenches from the south direction. With these two attacks, the Ukrainians can cut the main supply roads, and only after that the Ukrainians have possibilities to attack these small underground facilities from two sides, from the east and from the west. But we understand that it's highly unlikely the Ukrainians can cross the railways from the north and from the south, because, let's take a look at this video one more time. Railways are located on the hill, you see, on the hill, and the territory on the west and on the east of the railways is located in the lowland. So every time you get on this small hill, you are under complete even sniper fire. Sniper will take you down easily and immediately as soon as they get on the hill. And there are a lot of mines, of course, a lot of traps and so on. So I don't see possibilities for the Ukrainians. Of course, they can do this with a very massive assault, with significant number of losses, with significant number of killed soldiers and so on. With tanks and armored vehicles, it's highly unlikely the Ukrainians are able to cross the railways. So the battle for Andriivka stronghold continues, and I'm not sure that Ukrainians are able to capture the settlement today or tomorrow or even the day after tomorrow. So we'll see whether my projections and speculations are correct. When talking about Donetsk direction, as a result of clashes and fierce fightings in this area, the Ukrainians lost 350 soldiers. Significant number, a little 2 times more in comparison with the previous days, 8 armored vehicles and 5 artillery systems. When talking about Klishchiivka itself, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions on the hill 205.7, and the Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions in the trenches and the shelters that located on the west of Klishchiivka. When talking about Klishchiivka itself, we haven't received still any confirmations that the Ukrainians managed to establish 100% control over the settlement. Now we are moving to the Kupiansk and Lyman front line. The Ukrainians published a lot of videos of their FPV drone attacks against the Russian positions in Crimea, and currently, if we increase the number of updates, let's say from the beginning of August, we see that Ukrainians are pretty focused in this area, and the most important that Ukrainians try to combine not just FPV drones attacks, they try to combine 3 types of artillery or 3 types of long-range attacks they have. They're using HIMARS weapons for long-range superiority, and we know that they do have this superiority. The Ukrainians use FPV drone strikes to attack light vehicles, tanks, armored personnel carriers and so on, and the Ukrainians use also artillery systems during the counter-artillery duels. And basically this is probably the only front line in Ukraine from Ukrainian side where they are able to combine 3 types of long-range attacks: HIMARS missiles, regular artillery systems and FPV drones. And this is very important because when talking about other front lines, we see that Ukrainians don't have such possibilities. And the reason why the Ukrainians can do this, of course, Crimea forest, a lot of trees, a lot of areas and territories where the Ukrainians do have possibilities to hide their weapon and to attack the Russians from hidden positions. When talking about Kupiansk and Lyman front line, the level of losses a little bit are bigger in comparison with the previous day. For example, on Kupiansk front line, the Ukrainians lost 130 soldiers. And the most important probably is that Ukrainians made at least 1 counterattack trying to force the Russians to step back from Sinkovka, and the Ministry of Defense reported that that attack was made by 30th Mechanized Brigade, and this brigade recently was located in the vicinity of Solidar, and exactly the 30th Mechanized Brigade was the brigade who was trying to attack the Russians from Privili and Zalizniansk, and we got a lot of videos, discussed that many times, but after that, for some reasons, the Ukrainians took a decision to redeploy 30th Mechanized Brigade to the north in direction of Kupiansk. Probably there are a lot of problems and the Ukrainians need to slow down the Russians, and they need to have some fresh forces for counterattack. So I believe that we can even stop speculating about any attempts from the Ukrainian side to attack the north of Solidar and Bakhmut direction, because they don't have manpower and or forces to do this. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.